So there's this show called The Rising. It's part of... I'm going to start that over again. There's this show called The Rising. And it's part of The Hill, which is an online publication many of you might be familiar with. But it does this thing that I hate, where it just pairs like left-leaning individual hosts with fascist hosts, and to that extent I find it somewhat fascinating to just stare into the abyss sometimes. In this particular episode, Jessica Burbank and Robby Soave get into it, and well, let's just see where things go, shall we?
California Governor Gavin Newsom joined Fox News' Brett Baier, where he was pressed on his progressive policies. Let's watch.
The writing of how the prosecution for small crimes.
Oh, Prop 47.
47, I'm sorry.
Yeah, which is, by the way, the 10th toughest threshold in the United States of America, meaning you can steal up to $950 of goods and it will be charged as a misdemeanor. You can steal $2,500 in the state of Texas. Why you're not focusing on those other 40 states is beyond me. 10th toughest felony threshold in the United States of America.
That the pitch that she was a tough prosecutor in California is going to
You remember her primary for president? She was attacked from the left for being too tough, for being prosecutor, for having a prosecutorial mindset. So look, I mean, all these things, this is all fair game. But
now, keep in mind, Gavin Newsom is basically bioengineered in a lab to be good at being a politician. It doesn't surprise me that he's handling this extraordinarily well. Like my goodness. I dislike him, and I dislike his policies, but he is good at this.
At the end of the day, she's got a record of accomplishments as being part of the Biden-Harris administration. We've seen...
Newsom was also questioned about new data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics that showed U.S. job growth was significantly weaker than initially reported. Let's watch.
Even with the adjustment today of 818,000 jobs.
Which is a little weird, don't you think?
That means 14.9 million jobs since they got into office. That is, Brett, 11 times more than the last 3 Republican administrations combined. The lowest black unemployment, Hispanic unemployment, the lowest unemployment for women in our lifetime, an American manufacturing policy, an industrial policy that's worker-centered, that's advantaging red and rural districts of this country more than it is even blue and urban.
Baier also asked Newsom why Vice President Kamala Harris has been so quiet on policy and has made it all personal. Let's watch.
When she ran in 2019 for president, she had a lot of policy, specific policy ideas.
Yeah, but it probably has something to do with the fact that she's entering into the race in August.
Ideas that now we only have paper statements that they are saying that's completely different. Banning fracking, where she is on Medicare for all, immigration, all of these things are a 180. Is she going to explain that to us tonight?
Well, she's been part of the Biden-Harris administration. She's been in office
exactly for the last three and a half
years. So she has a record of accomplishments that I'll put up. I mean, come on.
I'll say this. I do appreciate the Democrats that are willing to go on Fox News and face contrary questioning. They're not all willing to do it. Gavin Newsom is one. Pete does it. Amy Klobuchar has done it.
Yep.
I was watching some Fox this week. A couple of them were on Laura Ingraham. Dean Phillips went on with Laura Ingraham. Did a very good job. So I think you look. Tougher and like you're actually interested in what, the 50% of the country that does not feel the way Democrats feel, where they're at and meeting them and discussing.
I do think it is good if you are left-leaning to go on Fox News, if you're able to actually be able to handle that particular environment. I would argue most people can't. Like it's a hostile environment. The cards are going to be stacked against you. People are going to be dogpiling you, and you have to know your facts because you can't look anything up in the moment. Like you gotta know your stuff, you know.
With them and trying to convince them that the Biden-Harris agenda is good for them. Yeah, I give props for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It feels like out of nowhere there's very good communicators in the Democratic Party, Robby. I mean, we know that Pete Buttigieg was kind of on the come up. He's a young guy. Gavin Newsom's been around for a while. People like Dean Phillips have been around for a while. Nancy Pelosi's been in office for a while and hasn't been doing what she's done recently. And so it feels like it all came out of nowhere, and I'm a little bit awestruck at it all. Since when does Gavin Newsom defend the record of California's toughness on crime on Fox News? And it's like they suddenly woke up and learned how to campaign. So it's very shocking, but it's good to see that there are people communicating and defending their policies and not just letting these accusations stand.
Sure. I mean, I do think that the Democrats, realized finally at some point over the last 4 years that a lot of what they were saying on crime, for instance, was not popular. And no, people want you to arrest carjackers and looters and rioters and people.
No one was saying you shouldn't arrest people doing that.
Robbing convenience stores and, of course, murderers, and they want to clear out.
Oh, yeah, all of those really vocal people saying you shouldn't arrest murderers.
Encampments of crazy people, homeless, having drugs in the street.
Yeah, all of those encampments of crazy people. No, they're encampments of homeless people who have nowhere else to live. They don't want to live in the trash, Robby.
And if you're not doing that, you have to explain why that's not happening. And, you can say that, well, it's because the legal system needs to be changed or the judges need to be changed or whatever it is, but you can't be for allowing that to continue. And so Gavin Newsom no longer is. He says, no, we're going to be as tough on crime as possible. Democrats understand that stuff. Democrats don't have to own as much their COVID policies anymore, which were deeply unpopular, including, Gavin Newsom, off for dinner at the French Laundry while everyone else is languishing under authoritarianism. But a lot of that is in the rearview mirror, and so
I have to be completely honest with you guys. If you closed your eyes and imagined everything that Robby just said being said by a wizened old man, you've just been imagining Ebenezer Scrooge. Okay? You've just been imagining Michael Caine in the first half of A Muppet Christmas Carol.
Democrats are, I think Bret Baier's right, largely running on vibes, but they're good and positive vibes, and it might very well work.
And I think it's important to say, Democrats' position, especially people like Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris and Mayor Eric Adams, their position on crime and how it should be punished has never wavered. It's just that Fox News have framed them as people who take on the views of people on the far left. No, they haven't. We've seen Kamala Harris be a tough prosecutor from day one in office. She's bragged about that. That's what her record shows. Her colleagues spoke about that last night at the DNC. The only thing that's changed is increasingly they're critical of the prison industrial complex. Slavery is still legal as punishment for a crime. According to the 14th Amendment, that is the law of the land of the United States.
True.
And we see prison labor frequently addressing a lot of the economic failures in our country. We had a warehouse, or rather a large beauty supply store, where all of the supplies were being put in a warehouse because it was closed down. All of that liquidation, all of those products were being processed by local prison labor.
You have prison labor?
Yes, I think many people are against not having fair wages paid to these workers.
I don't even think prisoners are against prison labor. I think they'd rather work than be bored all day.
Well, then you should talk to them.
Yeah, they'd rather work than be bored all day. Then let them work at, academics. Let them learn and better themselves rather than, operate license plate machinery for slave wages.
Them, Robby,
I have talked to them.
You've talked to people in prison about how they feel about doing labor. I would love to hear about that conversation.
I have not personally talked to them. I've read.
They love it when we enslave them, okay? You don't understand. The slaves love it. Okay? If you walk through a prison with prison labor, they're just singing songs. They love it.
Media stories and interviews with prisoners who would rather.
As I was saying, people who are paid minimum wage in the United States of America are not happy that America's largest corporations can contract that labor out for $1.50, far under minimum wage. That brings down wages in the United States. This is an unfair circumstance in the United States when you look at the 65% of families across the U.S. who are subject to high fines and fees because they have a family member who's in prison and they have to pay those fees, and they're struggling to pay basic necessities. This is the reality of the prison industrial complex, and that's what needs to change.
I don't agree. I think it's fine to put people in prison, and I don't think they should be, necessarily.
It's real crazy to watch this guy being like, well, I think people should be in prison, which she never argued that people shouldn't be in prison, though one could make an argument against, or rather for prison abolition. But, and then he's like, but I do like the slavery element of imprisoning people, though.
Really forced to do really difficult labor while in prison, but if they want to work and they want to earn.
They're not forced to do work in prison. My brother in Christ, they are literally offered like reductions in sentences if they work in prison. Their freedom is inexorably attached to whether or not they do labor for slave wages. And we're not just talking like, oh, they're just bottling soap, though some of them do that. They're just making t-shirts. Some of them do that. We're also talking about dangerous work that can kill you, like fighting fires. Like, what percentage of California's firefighters are like prison slaves? California prison firefighters. Oh man. California has long depended on incarcerated people to battle wildfires. Since the end of World War II, the state has relied on inmates to staff its more than 200 hand crews deployed each fire season to lay hoses and help contain the blazes by cutting fire lines free of vegetation. Oh my God. Crazy stuff. Oh, but guys, But a steady decline in the state's prison population due to sentencing reform has left many of California's minimum security conservation camps operating at half capacity or less. And as the 2024 fire season kicks into high gear, CAL FIRE is short 110 of its 236 budgeted hand crews. Only 126 crews were fully staffed as of Thursday, the agency formerly known as the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection said. Hand crews are truly what extinguishes wildland fires. And we don't have enough of those in the state right now. Boy, howdy. Maybe if that is something that is desperately needed for the safety of the public, you should pay them a fucking living wage to do it. A crazy idea here, but maybe people who are risking their lives and are crucial to the safety of all life in California, maybe they should be paid not slave wages. So strange. And it's real dangers. My oldest brother was a firebreaker, the guy who goes to cut down smaller trees to create fire breaks so fires can just cut a path through forests. Can't just cut a path through forests. Yeah. Like, if your plan is to rely on slave labor, it's a bad plan. I'm just saying, like, maybe that's a bad plan. Maybe we shouldn't rely on slave labor for public safety. Maybe we shouldn't have slave labor at all. Just spitballing that one. Also, can I just say, like, imagine complaining that you have fewer people in prison. Oh, the horror. We have fewer people in prison. Like, the framing of the article is like, we should have more people in prison to like staff up our fire crews. How about you just pay people a living wage so they want to work in that capacity? God.
A little bit of money to spend to make their lives in prison somewhat more enjoyable, I think that's fine, and I think they probably want to do that. I do not pretend.
Yeah, it's really good that you pay them slave wages so that they can operate in the company town you force them to live in.
To be an expert on prisons or criminal justice, but I work at Reason Magazine that does a lot on criminal justice reform, and
yeah, to make it worse, to have them in prison longer so you can use them as slaves for longer. Yeah, that's the kind of shit you advocate for in Reason Magazine.
The sense I get is that,
oh yeah, no, this guy, when I said at the beginning of this that this guy's like a fascist freak, I meant it.
One of the worst things about prison is that it's often very boring, and people want more, both more, educational stimulation, more.
I'm going to guess that if you give people the option between working for slave wages or getting a free education, they're going to pick the second one. I have that feeling in me.
Ability to read, to do classes, to do activities, and yes, also to do work. Look, I don't think work is not something. Maybe this is, I think, a problem.
Yeah, also, work isn't inherently bad. Slavery is, though. Slavery is. Maybe you shouldn't be enslaving prisoners. Maybe you shouldn't be forcing them to work for sub-minimum wage and treating them as if they have fewer rights because they're in prison. They still should be making wages that they are owed. You've taken away their freedom. That's the point of prison. You shouldn't be taking away their ability to earn a living wage.
The way the left thinks about this, that work is not something to be demonized, that most people get some kind of value out of doing some level of work. Obviously, people should be overworked to death.
Yeah, but the level of work you're talking about is like day-long labor in exchange for like $1.50.
They're forced to do work they don't want to do, I guess, but the work is itself not something bad. It can be enriching and rewarding, and it's better that.
Yeah, that's a good point too, Amir Alpaslan. Like, a lot of people who participate in prison labor develop the skills to do that labor, and then they can't do the labor once they leave prison because they're criminals. In point of fact, the firefighters that we were talking about that are used in California, the ones who are paid like slave wages to go fight fires, they can't become firefighters after they get out of jail or after they get out of prison.
It's certainly better than sitting around in prison all day with nothing to do. That sounds like real torture to me.
Slavery. We're talking about slavery, which is legal as punishment.
We're not talking about
for
slavery.
Crime, because
they volunteered to do it under coercion. They are coerced into doing the labor by the setup of their environment. Like, one of the things you can read about if you ever want to be horrified is the commodification of the prison ecosystem. and how money and value is extracted out of prisoners and their families and extended networks through that commodification, and how it has gotten worse and worse and worse over time. So they volunteer to do it to get the essential things that they need in order to live. That doesn't really sound like volunteer work.
Yes, people
Okay,
in prison
yes, you can
are
imprison-
forced-
Like, let me put it this way: they're not volunteering to work at soup kitchens for the homeless. They're not volunteering to go do construction work. They're not volunteering to do that stuff. Those are jobs. Okay? They're not going around like I've done a lot of volunteer work in my day, guys. I've done a lot of organizing for charity drives. This isn't volunteer work. I've seen what volunteers for volunteer work look like and why they do it. That's not what prisoners are doing.
People for
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Narodia, exactly. Dollars per minute to talk to family, and to incentivize that, they remove visitation rights. Yeah, exactly what I'm talking about. In a lot of prisons, the commodification has crept up to the extent where if you don't have money on the inside, you don't get to talk to anyone on the outside. You don't get to go and do a visitation with a visitor who comes to visit you. You don't have the money to do it. So how many people would volunteer for the right to be able to see their wife again? How many people would volunteer to be able to see their kid? This is not volunteering. This is coercion. This is slavery.
for committing a crime.
Yes, that is the reality in the United States. We're
Okay,
not
I don't think
talking
it's
about
slavery to imprison
voluntary
people.
labor and force them to work. That is what slavery is forcing people to labor. And so there are a lot of criticisms about how crimes are treated in the United States. People who use marijuana one time, are they a threat to our society?
I think all
Should
drugs
they
should be
in
legal, and we
prison
shouldn't imprison
and
anyone
forced
for doing
labor?
drugs.
Yeah, this seems to be an idea you're very ideologically committed to, which is why you're saying it in a very frustrated way.
Right, and so this is what Democrats are talking about. It's very
There aren't a lot of people in
agreeable
prison
things.
for doing marijuana.
Yes, there are.
How are you this dumb and you get hired professionally to do the thing you're doing? How many people are in prison for marijuana? There are 32,000 cannabis prisoners. Crazy. There are not a lot of them.
Robby,
it's
and these
not.
are very
It's not
agreeable
true.
things. That is true. There
It's
are
not
people
true.
who are in prison for having too much marijuana, and that is considered a crime, and in some states a felony, and they are put in prison for many years.
It
So-
happens, but there's not a lot of. And I don't.
There-
In 1997, almost 2% of the state inmate population were being held for offenses involving only marijuana. Like, my God. And that's just people in prison? The total number of people arrested, incarcerated for a period of time in 2020 was 317,000. Not very many people are affected by this, apparently, according to Robby Soave.
should
It's a
have it.
lot
By the
of
way,
it,
I
Robbie.
think it
Let's
should
pull
be.
up the statistics on that. And
Look,
I think-
I'm saying this because I used to assume naively that the vast majority of people in prison were there for like nonviolent drug crimes. It's not actually the case. I used to think that too. Like I have been corrected by people. Again, people who support legalizing all drugs as I do. I don't think anyone should be in jail for that stuff, but our prisons have violent criminals and have illegal immigrants in them. We don't have a ton of totally nonviolent. We have some, and they should not be in prison. Don't get me wrong, but
So the last estimate we have on
find
this
it right now.
was 40,000 for simple possession of marijuana in the United States. People
That's a
in
raw
prison-
number. That's not a percentage.
Yes, it's an estimate of how many people are locked up for that, because sometimes when people are tried, they're tried for multiple offenses. You can have an officer trying to search your car and you resist that, and then suddenly they tack on another offense of resisting an officer just because you're nervous you have marijuana in your car. So that's what Democrats talk about, which are very popular common sense criminal justice reforms. And then you have people on the right who are paid for, oftentimes by these companies who benefit from prison labor, to say the Democrats are too far left on prison, they're not prosecuting crimes. And it's a talking point because they have an agenda, because they rely on this labor to keep their profit margins high.
All right. Well, I don't think Democrats are going to be talking about reducing prison labor anytime soon, because
Yeah, also worth mentioning, and since it hasn't been brought up yet, I'll bring it up. Most people in jail haven't been convicted yet. If you're in jail, there are, in local jail, about 550,000 people in local jails total. Out of that 550,000, how many people, chat, do you think haven't been convicted yet? Take a few guesses. 400,000? 76%? All of them, 92%? 500,000? Out of how many? Out of 550,000 people, how many of them have not been convicted yet? Tell us. The answer is 448,000 people. Over 80%. Absolutely insane. Thought I was estimating high? Yeah. Let's see, just out of curiosity here. Out of curiosity. Yep. Here we go. The food on your table, brought to you by prison labor. Incarcerated workers help produce some of America's most popular food brands, but get few of the benefits and protections afforded to others because they're prisoners and can, not can be used for more dangerous and less regulated work. Super cool. Nearly 65% of incarcerated people work when they are behind bars.
My guess would be most people, again, support imprisoning violent criminals. We don't have any disagreement on the need.
You know, it's so interesting how he's babbling about, like, oh, most people support imprisoning violent people. Yeah. Most people support imprisoning violent people. I would hazard a guess most people don't support enslaving violent people.
Need to keep nonviolent, especially nonviolent drug offenders out of prison. I don't even think any of that should be.
Well, it's a bad situation for sure, but it's also bad to enslave violent people. Like you enslaving bad people doesn't, like, you're still the bad guy here.
Illegal. I totally do not mistake me for thinking people should be in prison for that or any of that kind of thing. And I guess I don't think that labor in prison should be mandatory, but the opportunity to work and earn a little bit of money to make your stay more tolerable, I wouldn't take that away from prisoners. You would take that away? You would say they can't do it unless they're going to be paid minimum wage?
I disagree.
Yeah, they should. If they're going to be offered the job, they should be paid a living wage to do it. Yeah.
Slavery, Robby. Yes, that is.
But okay, but let's say, okay, I'm a prisoner. I'm in prison. I want to, do this job for $2 an hour. I'm willing to do it.
The federal minimum wage should be the federal minimum.
But what if I say I'm willing to do it for $2?
That doesn't matter. The federal minimum.
You're gonna I consent, and you're saying I don't consent to this exchange. I'm making it illegal.
Yeah, the economy's a system.
Yeah, because they don't have control over their environment, Robby. Like if you have like a bed of red hot pokers in front of you, and you're about to be lowered onto those red hot pokers, and it's going to be excruciatingly painful, and someone's like, but hey, you could do this job and not get poked with red hot pokers. Oh boy, howdy. Are you gonna do that job? Even if they don't pay you anything, because you don't want to be tortured. When you don't have control over your environment, yeah, you're going to make choices you wouldn't normally make. When your ability to see your child is gatekept behind a paywall in prison, a paywall you have no other means of circumventing, and you need money, you're gonna do the job, man. Is Robby married? Like, Robby, if you couldn't see your spouse, but if you did a job in the prison for $1 per day, and that would allow you to see your wife once a week, would you not do that? But is that not coercing you to do horrific labor? Sure, you consented and the company consented, but you didn't consent to being imprisoned. You didn't consent to your environment exploiting you in that fashion. But you know what? I suppose if we started talking about your environment and coercion, that might get a little too close to the conditions under which we currently exist, which is called wage slavery, but that's a topic for another day.
Of workers, and if someone's labor is valued at $7.25 an hour, usually it's worth far more.
Well, no. This person's labor is valued at $2 an hour because they're a federal prisoner.
No, someone's labor is not valued at what the lowest.
It's labor. It's
then that job shouldn't exist. I'm sorry, if the job is not worth paying someone a living wage to do, then it should not be done by a person.
valued at whatever the person is willing to pay them and they're willing to receive. There is no tangible, physical, there's no golden rules written down that says how much you are worth or your time is worth.
Hey, Robby, does that mean like if somebody like comes up and mugs you, like they just, you know, you valued their labor? What they, you know, you valued their service? Like someone comes up, puts a gun to your head and says, give me your wallet. You know, you valued their service to you? Like you just gave them a few $100s from your wallet. No, man. Obviously, that's different. Obviously, it is not an equitable exchange when we're talking about prisoners, man.
This person is willing to be paid, is willing to accept $2 for this labor because they're a prisoner and they really just want something to do. And this person is willing to pay them that. And you're saying that even though there's total consent in between this exchange, you don't.
You're saying that this fine, young, enterprising gentleman is willing to perform the service of not pressing the trigger, and you're willing to give them your entire wallet? What about this exchange is not voluntary?
Don't consent to it as a third party in the government, and you're going to make it illegal.
I'm not the government, but I'll explain why that would be a bad
I think that's immoral.
If you let me speak and answer your question, I will. So the reason that is bad is because there are other workers that need more than $2 an hour because their housing is not provided by the U.S. government because they're not in prison, and it is bad for the labor market and for the economy.
So I don't have a right to do this job.
I mean, it's bad for the labor market as a whole. It's also bad because it's fucking slavery, man.
Because of
Robby,
other people.
if you don't let me finish speaking and you just interrupt me every time, this is not a conversation.
Okay, go ahead.
So if you are in prison, your housing is covered, your food is covered. It's all paid for by what? The government. So now you have the government subsidizing America's biggest corporations for their production. That is a bad economic practice. Those corporations and American labor should be done with people paid a living wage so they can cover their food and housing in the United States, not pull the wage down because that labor is available. It's bad for the economic system as a whole, not for the government, but for the market and the workers.
The economic system.
A market should determine someone's wages, not someone whose housing is subsidized by the government.
This is the market determining it.
I know that Jessica Burbank is trying to reach him where he's at. I don't think this is the sauce to do it. Like, I don't think the argument against doing prison labor and prison slavery is because it's bad for the market, though I understand the point that she's making. It's just not like a great way to make the argument. I think the better argument is it's fucking slavery, Robby. Like, I think that's honestly like a better argument and a more compelling one.
You're wanting a system where you determine it. The market is what's determining it. But you're trying to set policies that say exactly what you're allowed to be set. The market would be, this is what I'm willing to work for, this is what you're willing to pay for me, and we come to some arrangement, or we don't, and then that doesn't take place. You're saying
but this is
your
in
policies
not
should
in their free will.
supersede the
That's
market.
not a free market decision.
Oh, hey, here's an interesting thing. You know, take it with a grain of salt, of course. It is from the website Quora, and you know, obviously, Quora's a wretched hellhole. Take it with all of the salt. But here is a question. Is labor in prison 100% voluntary in current day U.S.? Has it ever been forced? What reasons do inmates typically have for wanting to work? And from a former correctional supervisor at the Federal Bureau of Prisons from 1987 to 2007. In the Federal Bureau of Prisons, sentenced inmates are required to work unless they are locked down or deemed unable to work by medical staff. If they do not have a high school diploma or GED, they're required to attend educational classes. I've been retired for 11 years, so some things may have changed. You cannot make them work or learn, but they have the choice of accepting a program assignment or going to the hole, segregation. The reason inmates would work, number one, to stay out of the hole, because it's bad to be in the hole. 2, to not get disciplinary reports that would cost them good time, a maximum 54 days per year served. Because if you work, you are less likely to be considered good for the duration of your incarceration. Not get transferred to a higher security prison where they would have less freedom of movement and worse inmates to be around, because the Bureau of Prisons can always make your life worse. Make a little commissary money. Most of them only earned 12 cents an hour when I left. But if they got into Unicor prison industries, they could work their way up to over $1 per hour. Boy, howdy. Amazing. 5, some were able to learn a skill other than mopping floors and scrubbing toilets while they are in there. And 6, have something constructive to do with their time. Not all inmates are worthless. The higher security you go, the more who are. Man, so interesting to have the number one reason Robby listed to be the the last reason on the list for them to actually participate. That's crazy, dog.
If someone's imprisoned against their will. So the market works well if someone's in prison. Robby, that doesn't make any sense.
The market, you're trying to put.
Okay. I did really enjoy that. I'm gonna watch that again because I enjoyed it.
Against their will. So the market works well if someone's in prison. Robby, that doesn't make any sense.
The market, you're trying to put specifications on under what conditions people in prison would be allowed to do work, and I'm.
There are conditions under which people are allowed to do work in prison, Robby. You buffoon. Like that already exists, man. Like yeah, we should have more conditions under which people are required to work in prison. Yeah. There should be more conditions for that.
Saying if they want to do work and someone wants to pay them, that's fine.
Slavery, Robby, that's not the same.
No, you're saying they should be forced into joblessness.
No,
they're in prison, Robby. Fuck you.
Didn't. They can have the option to work for the federal minimum wage.
At a rate.
This is literally, by the way, literally arguments that were made to support chattel slavery. This is literally, Robby here is just diving in and resurrecting like 1840s slaver apologia. It's insane. It's insane. Well, if you free them, then you are robbing them of a consistent and reliable home, throwing them to the whims of joblessness. Really, we're doing them a favor by keeping them working on our plantations. Like, it's insane.
You set.
Fair.
He's literally talking about how the people in prison yearn for the fields. They yearn for the mines.
No, at a rate you've determined is fair. The rate they've determined fair is the two people involved in the exchange. I mean, this is my problem with the minimum wage, is that it's the government deciding what's fair.
Robby, they're in prison. They only get private property if the prison allows them to have the private property. Man, like, prison doesn't respect your private property rights. Like, what do you mean? They are not equitable, like, negotiators in this, and you know that, which is why, like, at every turn in this conversation, you've sounded like a confused child encountering these ideas for the first time. Absolutely wild. I will work for $1, Robby. Yeah, I hope, you know what? I hope his boss brings that up at his next performance meeting. You know, worth bringing up when it comes to Robby Soave's, compensation. Also, Jaeger Larson, thank you for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs over on Twitch. I very, very much appreciate that. But yeah, very, very rarely do you get to see someone go so mask off.
instead of the people involved in the trade of money for labor.
Okay, we're going to leave this one here. More Rising after this.
One thing I do appreciate about Jessica Burbank is that she very clearly hates Robby Soave, and I think that speaks well of her character. I don't think you can like Robby Soave and also be a good person.